So picture this. It's 2:00 a.m. The house is completely dead silent. You're lying in bed, you're staring up at the ceiling, and your mind is just racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Oh, yeah. The classic midnight mental treadmill.
Exactly. I mean, you aren't just awake, right?
Yeah.
You are trapped in this high-speed mental tornado. Maybe you're agonizing over, like, some slightly awkward comment you made at a party 5 whole years ago.
Right, something nobody else even remembers.
Exactly. Or maybe you're spiraling out of control about a completely imaginary crisis at work, something that hasn't even happened, and let's be real, probably never will.
Yeah, but your brain is treating it like an absolute certainty.
Right. And you are just exhausted. Your body desperately needs rest, but your brain just flat out refuses to hit the brakes. It feels like you are literally a hostage in your own head.
It's an incredibly isolating feeling, isn't it? Lying there in the dark while the rest of the world just seems to be, peacefully asleep.
It really is.
And if you're listening to this right now and nodding along, feeling that familiar knot in your stomach, you really need to know that you are far from alone in that experience. I mean, we are living in a modern era characterized by an absolute avalanche of information.
Yeah, the constant notifications.
Exactly. Constant notifications, this relentless, fast-paced lifestyle. And our nervous systems simply were not built to handle it.
And that is actually the core mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring the insights from Nick Trenton's book, Stop Overthinking.
It's such a crucial read.
It really is. We want to understand how this midnight mental marathon isn't just some harmless, quirky personality trait. It's actually a highly complex mental trap. But more importantly, we're going to look at exactly how you can break out of it, rewire those thought patterns, and actually reclaim your mental energy.
Because to really understand what's happening to you at 2:20 a.m., we have to look at the biological reality of the human brain.
Right, the evolution of it all.
Yeah. Nature designed your brain to be this exquisite, supreme problem-solving tool. Over millions of years, it evolved to keep you safe by constantly, and I mean constantly, scanning the horizon for threats.
Trying to find the danger before the danger finds you.
Exactly. But in our modern environment, there are no saber-toothed tigers lurking in the bushes anymore.
Just unread emails.
Right. Instead of tigers, there's a flood of emails, social media updates, global news, financial pressures. And the crazy thing is your brain cannot tell the difference between a physical predator and a looming project deadline.
Wow. So it reacts the exact same way.
It really does. Because of that, it gets stuck in this perpetual high alert mode.
Yeah.
So that very evolutionary tool that kept our ancestors alive is now just burning up your cognitive resources on completely imaginary threats.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because going from the biological reality of a high alert ancient brain to, how we actually behave on a daily basis, that's really where the rubber meets the road.
Definitely.
How does that survival mechanism turn into us, like obsessing over a single email for 3 hours?
So Trenton offers a pivotal insight here that fundamentally shifts how we view this behavior. He says that overthinking is not simply the act of thinking too much.
Wait, really? Because the name literally implies...
I mean, no, it sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But it isn't a surplus of intelligence, and it isn't a surplus of focus. Overthinking is actually a visible symptom of underlying hidden anxiety.
Oh, interesting.
The thoughts themselves, like the agonizing over the email or replaying that party conversation, those are just the smoke. The anxiety is the fire.
So the thoughts aren't the root cause at all.
No, not at all. Your brain is already buzzing with this baseline stress, and it's actively searching for a target to project that stress onto.
The book has this story about a guy named James that just captures this perfectly.
Oh, yeah, the red spot story.
Yes. So James is just going about his normal day. He takes a shower, and he notices a tiny nondescript red spot on his back.
Just a normal little blemish.
Right. And a calm brain might think, oh, a bug bite, or, I should probably just keep an eye on that. But James's brain is already on high alert, so he immediately turns into an internet doctor.
Oh, we've all been there. The classic medical rabbit hole.
You're right. He hops online, types red spot on back into a search engine, and within minutes, I mean literally minutes, he has scrolled right past all the logical, common explanations.
Naturally. You always skip the benign stuff.
Exactly. He zeroes in on the absolute worst-case scenario and completely convinces himself he has a rare, fatal disease.
Because the sheer volume of information available at our fingertips makes it incredibly easy to validate our worst fears.
And he doesn't stop at the diagnosis either. He spends the next several hours agonizing not just about this imaginary disease, but about the cascading
Like the
consequences.
snowball effect.
Yeah, like how will his family survive financially without him? Who will take care of his kids? How is his funeral going to play out? I mean, he loses an entire day of his life completely consumed by pure, unadulterated panic over what is ultimately a benign blemish.
It's exhausting just hearing about it.
It is. And on the surface, you look at that situation and say the red spot caused the overthinking. But the true aha moment here is that the red spot didn't cause anything.
Right. It was just a blank canvas.
Exactly.
The spot simply provided a convenient excuse for James's pre-existing internal anxiety to latch onto. His nervous system was already overwhelmed, desperately looking for a tangible reason to justify why it felt so stressed in the first place.
So the spot gave his anxiety a shape.
Yes, it gave his generalized anxiety a specific shape and a terrifying narrative. And understanding this dynamic leads to Trenton's ultimate, really liberating rule
Which is?
that stress in human life is inevitable. It is a biological given.
Yeah.
You will never, ever reduce your environmental stress to absolute zero.
Right, life is just stressful.
Exactly. But overthinking is entirely optional. It's a secondary reaction to stress, and it is a choice, even if it feels completely automatic in the moment.
Man, that feels like a massive paradigm shift, but also honestly kind of a tall order.
Oh, for sure.
Because if overthinking is an optional reaction to the unavoidable stress of life, how do we practically stop choosing it? I can tell you, when I'm in the middle of a mental spiral, it certainly does not feel like I'm making a conscious choice.
No, of course not. And Trenton gets that. That's why he provides a highly practical framework for daily life to address this. He calls it the 4 A's of managing daily stressors.
The 4 A's, okay.
Yeah. Think of these as proactive strategies to build a levee against that baseline anxiety, keeping the water level low so it doesn't eventually erupt into an overthinking spiral later. The 4 A's are avoid, alter, accept, and adapt.
Okay, let's dive into how those actually work in the wild, like starting with avoid.
Right, so avoid means actively curating your environment to cut out unnecessary triggers.
Yeah.
Because we absorb an enormous amount of passive stress without even realizing it.
Give me an example.
Well, applying this could be as simple as muting the notifications on a really active, chaotic group chat that constantly pulls your attention and spikes your adrenaline.
Oh, I have a few of those.
We all do. Or it might mean taking a different route through the office just to avoid a particularly toxic colleague who always complains and drains your energy. You're simply removing the stimulus before it can even affect your nervous system.
Okay, so you're controlling what gets access to your brain in the first place. That makes sense. But what about when you can't avoid the trigger? Like, if it's your boss?
Then you move to the second A, which is alter. When you can't just walk away from a stressful situation, you have to change its nature by taking action.
So setting boundaries.
Exactly. It almost always comes down to communicating clear boundaries. If a manager is constantly piling last-minute work on your desk at, say, 4:45 p.m., you alter the dynamic by explicitly stating what you have the capacity to handle.
Like proposing a new system for assigning tasks.
Yes, you stop being a passive recipient of stress and you become an active participant in changing the environment.
Okay, avoid and alter make total sense to me. You're taking charge, setting boundaries, protecting your peace. But I have to push back a little on the third A, which is accept.
A lot of people struggle with this one.
Because, honestly, doesn't accepting a terrible situation just mean you're giving up? It sounds like you're just rolling over, being a pushover, and letting the world dictate terms to you.
It is a really common and understandable misconception. But psychological acceptance has absolutely nothing to do with surrender or weakness. Let's use a specific analogy from the text to really clarify the mechanism here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you're at a railway station, and you look up at the board to find out your train is delayed by 2 hours.
Oh, I'd be furious.
Right. You're furious. You have important places to be, so you start pacing the platform, clenching your fists, mentally cursing the transit authority, complaining to any other passenger who makes eye contact.
Yeah, you're burning serious mental calories fighting the delay.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But consider the actual physics of the situation. Will your pacing, your anger, or your mental cursing make that train arrive even one single minute faster?
No, obviously not.
No. The situation is entirely outside of your locus of control. So in this context, accepting simply means ending your mental war with reality.
Ending the war with reality. I like that.
It means looking at the situation and stating, the train is late, I do not like it, it is incredibly inconvenient, but it is a factual reality.
Yeah, and once you accept it.
By accepting the unchangeable fact of the delay, you instantly stop the leak of massive amounts of cognitive energy. You reclaim those 2 hours. You can now use that conserved energy to sit down, read a book, listen to music, or catch up on work.
So it's about not arguing with a brick wall.
Yes, acceptance is about emotional efficiency, not defeat. It's refusing to suffer twice.
You acknowledge the wall is there so you can calmly walk around it instead of continually banging your head against it.
Beautifully put.
And that perfectly sets up the final A, which is adapt. And my understanding is this focuses heavily on shifting your internal expectations, right? Especially if you struggle with perfectionism.
Exactly. Adapting means realizing that if a project you're working on turns out to be, say, 80% perfect instead of that impossible, flawless 100% you envisioned in your head, you still view it as a success.
You're adapting your definition of a win to match the reality of human limitation.
Yes. When you apply those 4 A's, avoid, alter, accept, adapt, you are essentially building a daily defense system. They keep the baseline anxiety in check when you're planning your day, interacting with colleagues, and just navigating the world.
But what happens at midnight?
Ah, yes, the 2.0 a.m. problem.
Because the 4As seem incredibly useful for daytime planning, right? When the sun is shining, your prefrontal cortex is online, and you actually have your wits about you. But what do you do when pure, unadulterated panic sets in, your heart is pounding out of your chest, and all logic just flies completely out the window? You can't exactly alter or adapt a 2.0 a.m. panic attack.
No, you really cannot. And there's a profound biological reason why logic completely fails you in those moments.
What's going on in the brain?
During a panic attack or intense overthinking spiral, your brain's alarm bell, which is this tiny almond-shaped structure called the amygdala, becomes completely overactive. It essentially stages a coup.
A coup. Like, it takes over.
Literally, it hijacks your nervous system
Okay.
and physically shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, rational, language processing part of your brain.
Oh, wow. So logic is actually offline.
Yes. That is why telling yourself to just calm down or trying to rationally argue with your fear never works. The logic cannot reach the control room because the amygdala has locked the door and cut the phone lines.
Wait, if you can't think your way out of a thought spiral, what do you do? How do you stop it?
You have to bypass the cognitive thought process entirely.
Yeah.
You have to use the physical body to ground the mind.
Okay, how does that work?
Trenton highlights a highly effective sensory technique known as the 5-4-3-2-1 method. Because the amygdala is reacting to imaginary internal threats like a fabricated future crisis, you have to force your brain to process external physical reality.
Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Walk me through it.
You start by forcing yourself to visually identify 5 distinct things around you. And you don't just glance at them, you really study them. Notice the specific shade of blue on a book spine or the intricate pattern of veins on a leaf outside the window.
Just really focusing in on the visual details.
Right. Then you move to touch. You physically touch 4 things. Feel the woven texture of the blanket you're sitting on, the cold metal of a lamp, or even the temperature of your own skin.
Okay.
And then you continue down the senses, actively listening for 3 distinct sounds, smelling 2 things, and tasting 1 thing.
You know, here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because of what's happening under the hood when you do this, think about a frozen computer.
Oh, I love this analogy.
Right. When your screen freezes and the cursor won't move, clicking the mouse 100 times in frustration doesn't help at all. You are just adding more commands to a system that is already completely overloaded. So what do? You hold down the physical power button, you force a hard restart, and by flooding your brain with intense physical sensory data like the exact color of the wall or the cold feeling of the lamp, you're abruptly interrupting the imaginary fear spiral.
You really are.
It's like you're forcing a hard restart on a hanging brain, yanking the mind out of the disastrous imaginary future and bringing it crashing back into the safe, physical, present reality.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. You are intentionally using your sensory bandwidth to crowd out the anxiety bandwidth. The brain can only process so much data at once. If you max it out with physical sensations, there is simply no processing power left to run the imaginary doom scenarios.
Okay, so the sensory reboot works for the immediate midnight panic. It gets you through the night, you fall back asleep, but morning always comes.
It always does.
And the emails, the projects, the chaotic family schedules, they are still there waiting for you the second you open your eyes. How do we stop the brain from instantly overloading again the next day?
This is where we transition from those emergency brakes to long-term systemic management. Trenton introduces the Eisenhower matrix, but he frames it specifically for the overthinking mind.
Right, the urgent versus important grid.
Exactly. Overthinkers fundamentally struggle with a broken prioritization filter. They confuse what is urgent with what is truly important. An overthinker's brain treats a pinging group chat with the same biological urgency as a house fire.
That is so true. Everything feels like an emergency.
Because of this, they spend their days frantically putting out tiny, meaningless fires while completely neglecting their big picture long-term goals.
So how does the matrix actually fix that broken filter? Walk us through the mechanism.
The matrix forces you to pause and categorize every single task into one of four distinct quadrants based strictly on its urgency and its true importance.
Okay, quadrant one.
The first quadrant is do. These are tasks that are both urgent and important. A true crisis, a hard deadline today, a medical emergency. You handle these immediately.
No brainer.
Right. The second quadrant is schedule. These are important, but not urgent. This includes things like learning a new skill, focusing on your physical health, or long-term strategic planning.
And this second quadrant seems to be where overthinkers suffer the most.
Absolutely.
Because these tasks don't have a blaring alarm attached to them, they get infinitely pushed back. The brain favors the quick dopamine hit of replying to a minor email over the slow, meaningful progress of, say, writing a business plan.
Precisely. And that constant deferral of important goals creates a deep, underlying hunt of existential unfulfillment, which fuels even more anxiety. The matrix forces you to physically block out time on your calendar for these quadrant 2 tasks, protecting them from the noise of the day.
Okay, so that's dot on schedule. What's the third?
You have the third quadrant, delegate. These are things that are technically urgent to someone, but not actually important to your core goals.
Like the ringing phone.
Yes,
Yeah.
or a minor administrative request from a coworker. You find a way to pass these on, automate them, or set specific limited times to handle them in batches.
Which brings us to the fourth quadrant. And honestly, the one that sounds the most terrifying to an overthinker, but also the most liberating.
Delete.
Yes, delete. These are tasks that are neither urgent nor important. They are pure distractions.
Trenton emphasizes the profound psychological liberation of this delete quadrant. For an overthinker, the overwhelming urge is to hold on to every single piece of information, every article, and every minor to-do list item, just in case.
It's like hoarding, but mentally.
Exactly. The brain hoards information as a false sense of security. But the mental piece of actively looking at a task, deciding it adds no value to your life, and completely crossing it off your list forever, it is immeasurable. It drastically reduces the daily information overload dragging down your cognitive RAM.
It's exactly like finally closing all those dozens of browser tabs you've been hoarding for 3 weeks.
Yes, perfect example.
You think you need them, but the second you click close all, the relief is instant. Your computer runs faster and your brain runs faster. So we have a system for organizing our external tasks and filtering the noise of the world. But what if the information overload isn't coming from your inbox? What if the noise is coming from inside the house?
The inner monologue.
Right. What if the primary problem is your own relentless negative self-talk? Like, you make one tiny meaningless mistake on a presentation, and suddenly your internal monologue labels you a total irredeemable failure.
Yeah, that all-or-nothing mentality is an incredibly destructive pattern. When your own internal narrative is the primary source of the stress, Trenton points toward cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and specifically a technique called cognitive restructuring.
I love cognitive restructuring.
It's so powerful. The core premise here is that just because you have a thought does not mean that thought is true.
Which is hard for overthinkers to grasp.
Very hard. Overthinkers accept their anxieties as established facts. Cognitive restructuring forces you to actively challenge them.
I love the way this is framed. It's like you essentially treat your own thoughts like a hostile witness in a courtroom.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Let's say you send an email, and your brain suddenly throws out the thought, my boss hates me. An overthinking brain just accepts that as gospel truth and starts panicking about getting fired and living on the street.
Spiraling immediately.
Exactly. But with cognitive restructuring, you put that thought on the witness stand. You slam your hands on the table and demand hard evidence. Okay, brain, prove it. Show me the documentation that the boss hates me.
And what usually happens?
Usually, when you force your brain to present its case, you realize your proof is absurdly flimsy. You realize your only evidence is that the boss didn't use an exclamation mark in their morning email. Case dismissed.
It completely breaks the illusion that your thoughts are undeniable realities. And exploring this mechanism leads us to what I consider the most profound psychological philosophy in Trenton's entire book, the concept of externalization.
Externalization.
Yes, the core principle is simple but incredibly radical for an anxious mind. You are not your problems. You are not your anxiety. To help visualize this, Trenton uses a beautiful, ancient analogy.
Oh, the sky and clouds.
Right. Imagine your mind as the sky. The sky is infinite, vast, and fundamentally stable. Your thoughts, your anxieties, your memories, and your fears, they are just clouds.
Sometimes they're little white fluffy clouds just passing by without a care in the world.
And sometimes they are massive, dark, terrifying storm clouds that blot out the sun entirely. When you are in the middle of a massive thunderstorm, it feels like the storm is all there is. It feels like the darkness is permanent.
It really does.
But clouds, by their very nature, come and go. They drift in, they unleash their rain, and eventually they dissipate and blow away. Throughout all of that chaos, the fundamental nature of the sky never changes.
The sky is untouched.
Exactly. The sky's not damaged by the storm. It doesn't permanently turn dark just because a cloud passed through. By externalizing your thoughts, you realize you are the sky observing the clouds. You are not the clouds themselves.
So how do we operationalize that? Like, how do we actually separate ourselves from the storm clouds when we're just, sitting at our desks freaking out?
Yeah. Well, there's a really fun, practical tool from the text to help create this distance. Trenton suggests giving your inner critic a silly, mundane name.
Right. Let's call him Fred.
Fred is perfect. So Fred is that relentless voice in your head telling you that you're going to fail, that everyone in the office is judging your outfit, that the red spot on your back is definitely fatal.
Naming the critic is such a brilliant, disarming psychological trick. It takes the power away from the nebulous fear.
It really does.
Because when the negative spiral starts, instead of thinking, I am a failure and I am panicking, you pause, take a breath, and say, oh, listen to that. Fred is playing his old record again. Classic Fred, always overreacting about typos.
Suddenly you aren't the one panicking. Fred is.
Exactly. And Fred is just some annoying guy standing in the corner of the room. It completely turns the tables. It shifts you from being a helpless, passive character trapped inside the narrative of your own mind into the author of your life.
You regain control.
You get to step back, observe the thought, and consciously decide whether or not you actually want to listen to what Fred has to say today.
That psychological distance is everything. As Viktor Frankl famously noted, between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. Fred creates that space.
Now, taking all of this in the biological traps of our ancient brains, the 4 A's for daily defense, the sensory grounding techniques, the Eisenhower filter, and of course managing Fred the inner critic, the core takeaway we want to leave you with is incredibly helpful.
It really is an empowering message.
It is. Overthinking is not a genetic flaw. It is not an unchangeable personality trait that is hardwired into your DNA, dooming you to a life of anxiety. It is a learned behavior. It's a coping mechanism dictated by our high-stress modern environment and our evolutionary wiring.
And the beautiful truth about learned behaviors is that they can be unlearned.
Yes, you have the power to step off the runaway train. A single small decision made with a calm, grounded mind in the present moment is 1,000 times more powerful than spending hours trapped in a panicked overthinking spiral about a future that hasn't happened yet.
You know, if we pull all the way back and look at the trajectory of our species, the source material introduces a fascinating, almost existential thought experiment.
Oh, the AI thing.
Right. We have just spent this entire deep dive discussing how the human mind has this deep-seated evolutionary engine constantly running, trying to solve problems to ensure our survival.
Yeah.
That relentless problem-solving engine is what currently leads us to overthink when we're placed in a modern, relatively safe world.
Yeah.
But look at the technological landscape we are rapidly entering with the dawn of artificial intelligence.
The pace of that change is just staggering. It feels like every week there's a massive leap forward.
It's true. So imagine a very near future where AI effectively takes over all of our complex, logistical problem solving.
Yeah.
It manages our supply chains, makes our logical business decisions, predicts our daily challenges, and solves them perfectly before they even reach our desks.
Sounds nice, honestly.
But think about it. What will happen to the human brain in that environment? If we have absolutely no practical, survival-level logistical problems left to solve, will our evolutionary instinct to overthink simply die out, like an unused muscle that slowly atrophies over generations,
Or
or deprived of external practical problems to chew on, will that immense mental energy mutate? Will it turn inward, pushing us into an entirely new, unknown realm of emotional anxiety and existential overthinking just to keep the engine running?
wow. That is honestly a little terrifying, but an incredibly profound question to consider. Are we going to evolve past the biological need to worry, or are we just going to invent brand new, purely psychological phantoms to stress about?
It's something to think about.
We will leave you to chew on that thought. But as for today, remember that the cognitive energy you're wasting on imaginary future crises, whether it's the fatal red spot, the delayed train, or a ruined presentation, that energy is precious.
Very precious.
If you can harness it, filter it, and apply it to your present capabilities, it could completely change the trajectory of your life. So tonight, when it's 2:00 a.m., the house is dead silent, and you find yourself staring up at the ceiling as the mental tornado starts to spin. Remember, you do not have to let Fred do the talking. Take a breath, find 5 specific things in the room you can see, force a hard restart, and take back control of your mind.